All right. Well, hello, and hello to everyone who's going to watch this later. Thank you for joining us. Today, I have the distinct pleasure of interviewing Dr. Rajiv Bhola, who is joining me to talk about a new field, something that many people probably haven't even thought about yet. So I'm excited to speak with him about that. And so, first off, I'm going to ask if you could please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the work that you do.
Sure, thank you. Um, I'm an educational developer with a focus on curriculum development assessment practices and been working a lot on generative AI lately, and not just for assessment practice, but also generative AI for instructional design. And uh, uh, Prior to being an educational developer, I was an educational technologist. And also, I have a bachelor's and master's in classics and a PhD in religious studies. I was teaching in the arts and humanities in the multidisciplinary fields of classics and religious studies for 13 years or so, um, um, in all manners of uh, all the variations of modalities that we've had over the past few years. Um, but and As well, I'm a solar. I'm a supporter of solars. Interested in a number of areas, including belonging. Um,
Ooh.
and I guess maybe I'll mention as well that I'm currently doing a graduate certificate in Sodal through the Jane and Ron Graham Center for Sodal and College of Education at University of Saskatchewan.
Amazing. So no dull moments for you. Sounds like you're really busy.
Well, better than being bored.
For sure. I'm interested in talking to you about kind of your maybe a passion project or your research interests and mine and how they overlap. So we're going to, as a foreshadowing for everyone watching this, we're going to be talking about generative AI and belonging today in this interview. So to start off, though, I'd like to ask you, Raj, could you, in your own words, how would you define belonging?
Okay.
Loading question.
No small questions here. Broadly speaking, um, belonging is the subjective feeling of membership or inclusion in a collective or environment. So it's a feeling of being comfortable, secure, accepted, included, and supported. And more than that, I would say it's the feeling of membership or inclusion, not because you fit in with a pre-existing culture or established atmosphere, but for being who you are with whatever that entails.
Yeah, I think that's a really important distinction in our definition of that term. As you put it, that it's not that you can climatize or fit in with the group, that you're welcomed for who you are and the unique characteristics that you bring that will add something to the environment.
Feeling that you have a contribution to make, that your
Yeah.
contribution is welcome, that you are valued, that you
Mhm.
matter. Mm.
Yeah, that's a whole other conversation. If we go down the mattering trail, then we'll be here for 3 hours and people will be tuning out. So better stick
I'd
to the
like
topic
I'd
at
like to
hand.
think our I'd like to think our discussion's more interesting than
Oh, like
we
I
could go
said,
on for
it's so
5 hours. So
riveting.
stay tuned.
Well, maybe we'll get to that later on in our conversation, and we may come back to that. But for now, I really want to focus on the two pieces that you and I are both interested in. So, continuing this bit about belonging and welcoming people and recognizing that everyone has something unique and valuable to bring. Um, why why would you say that belonging is important in higher education? Like, why should we have this conversation about what it is to begin with?
Well, much of the conversation around belonging uh, much of the conversation around belonging directly pertains to student performance,
Mhm.
as well as student retention and persistence to graduation.
Oh, yeah.
So, students who feel that they belong, whether it's in the classroom, in a program, on a campus, what have you, students who feel they belong are going to invest themselves in those environments. They're going to engage with their instructors, with their peers, with staff, which is what we want. That's what we hope for.
Absolutely.
Um, and they're going to work to make sure others feel as though they belong as well. And I mean, their
Mhm.
overall implications, not just for student engagement, but good mental health. And I would say we recognize instructional institutional strategies that signal to students that, sorry to bring this word up again, that signal to students that they matter. Um, Things like high impact practices, choice and voice, peer learning, students as partners, different forms of authentic assessment, anything that flattens the hierarchy or allows students to incorporate their personal interests and identities in their studies. Um, so whether it's making them feel that their studies are valuable to them or helping them become emotionally invested in their disciplines, feel that they're welcome, and so on. So, I mean, these strategies are valued because of the impact on student investment in their studies and or their campus engagement. And students carry those values with them post graduation, right, out into the world as well. So it's not, it starts in one place, but it's sort of in the interest of, let's say, catching on. Um, world doesn't end with the graduation cap.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to ask you about that and how I'll say fostering belonging in our classes affects students after they leave the class. Because you mentioned um, their involvement on the campus. So we can think about things like clubs. And when you talk about HIPs, almost half of the HIPs are like student groups where they're going to interact with more than just people who are in their class. Yeah. So not to put words in your mouth, but I think you can say what you want out of this, but I think that in a way what you're getting at is that fostering belonging in our classrooms influences our campus culture as well and the potential attitudes and approaches that our students take into the workplace.
Well, I mean, absolutely. That's one of the hope for outcomes, right? From, I mean, university education, period, and that is, developing values and attitudes, and you can feel it when you're on a campus
Oh, yeah.
that feels belonging. It wraps around you.
Yeah,
It's
it's powerful. That's true. Yeah. Well, I want to, not that this is a brilliant segue or anything, but I wanted to talk about AI. So, as we know, especially anyone in education right now who are in constant conversations about this, that AI has become actually quite a large concern. It's a tool, but it's a big concern in higher education since beginning of last year and moving into this year, of course. So, what is your opinion about AI tools in higher education?
well, the concern you're referring to is, I presume, academic dishonesty,
Maybe. What?
maybe.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we talk about now people are talking about using, I'll just say like ChatGPT, for example, as a editing tool and teaching people how to use it for editing. But too often, people are using it to do the work, do the thinking for them.
And that was, I mean, that was the principal concern. That was the main concern when Gen AI came out, that this is how it was going to be used. And I mean, certainly, and that's um, hardly not to be expected. I mean, it does continue to be a concern for this one, but I mean, we've been through this before, and not all so long ago, right? With the advent of Web 2.0
Mhm.
and Wikipedia, and I mean, even just the Google search engine, even smartphones. That's just a couple. Let's throw in the calculator as well,
So
and each posed a potential threat to what we were trying to accomplish in the classroom. When they came out, and over time we adapted to either incorporate it, to leverage it, redesign learning experiences to neutralize its let's say potential negative impact, educate students on the proper use of it, and so on and so forth. It's taken time, but we've developed strategies, right?
yeah,
To um, so there's a lot to unpack there. Um, Generative AI has been public for a little over a year now. Um, and it's still a very new tool, and there are major developments weekly, sometimes daily, and things are moving quite rapidly still. So the problem with something evolving this rapidly is that it's like trying to nail Jello to the wall,
yes.
right? So first you're trying to understand what this thing is so that you can assess the impact that it's having on teaching and learning.
Mhm.
And then you find once you've gotten there, um, that your knowledge is maybe just a little bit outdated because the
Mm.
landscape has changed. Uh, so yeah, personally, I don't think of generative AI in higher education as good or bad.
Okay.
It just is. So
Explain.
generative AI is here to stay, and we need to get comfortable with that fact. And it's just like any tool that's come our way that seemed to present a crisis. Um, we find our way. I mean, we may still be dealing with things
Sure.
like the internet, um, but we find our way in, and education adapts, learning environments adapt, scholarship adapts. The careers adapt.
Yeah.
And that's just what we do. We're good at that. But I say that I don't think it is good or bad because I mean it's just a tool. Ultimately, it's just a tool, and it is now part of our toolkit. Students have been using it. They're going to use it. They're going to more so. They're going to be expected to use it in their jobs. They're going to be expected to know how to use it effectively in their fields. And as educators, I mean, we should be using it too. Tools exist to offload labor, to streamline processes, to increase efficiency, things like that. And so, I think that really what it is the question is multiple questions, but like what is safe to offload?
Sure.
How do we use this tool? What does improved efficiency look like for learning goals?
Yeah.
And how do we teach people, students or whoever, how do we teach people to use it with integrity, responsibly, and for the right things? And what are those right things? I suppose that's as far as where does Gen AI belong in higher education? I suppose that's where my thinking is.
Awesome. There's a few things I want to ask you based on that. It will take us down a slightly different path for a minute, but I still think it's valuable and interesting. So, for anyone who wants to probably skip the next like 3 minutes of this interview, hit fast forward.
Ooh,
Uh,
tensions.
Tangent, here we go. Okay, so question for you then about like offloading and using it to, we'll say, maximize efficiency in other ways. I think one of the big concerns that we're coming across, of course, as professors, is that students, like I said, the tool's doing the thinking for them. So would you have any tips or advice in that regard? Because I know you've mentioned like we everybody has to figure out what are those right things to offload, et cetera, how to use the tool appropriately. And so we're trying, I think most places are trying to not only understand it, but teach it. Um, but either how do we do that better or encourage the students to be careful about their use of it? Because they're not going to learn very much. And then if they finish their degree, they're getting a paper that's essentially meaningless. And then they go to work and they can't do the job.
Mhm. Uh, well, I mean, a couple of things on that. It's if the students, and this might be a bit of a generalization, but if the students are using it to offload things that they should be committing to heart, it might be because they don't see the value of committing that to heart. So
Okay, good point.
where industry is, let's say, uh, leveraging generative AI is in tasks where uh, perhaps everyday tasks where you maybe shouldn't be devoting mental resource or effort.
Mhm.
You know,
The
email
mundane.
responses and the mundanes.
Yeah.
But where the person, where the human really should be intervening is,
Mm,
or it's those higher level areas, those higher level tasks or elements of that task that cannot be replicated. And it's a matter of um, if there's a skill, if there's a skill or knowledge that students should be developing, that they should be developing, that they could do with AI, then it needs to be communicated. What would help, anyways, is to communicate or signpost why there's value in learning the thing,
mm,
and signaling that yes, you could use generative AI to do this, and you can do that later. But for now, here's why you
mhm.
shouldn't. And especially if there's a community agreement in place or something like that, where that you can the students can sort of come together, some sort of a contract, sort of saying, okay, we recognize what's going on here. We understand our learning outcomes, and we understand why it is that we should not be offloading this particular thing. Um, so, I mean, that's one element, let's say, and um, and actually, an anecdote comes to mind. I was because this might seem a little pie in the sky what I'm saying, but I did um, visit a colleague's course one day to co-deliver a lesson, and they informed me that they had had this sort of conversation. This would have been back in May, maybe of last year, that they had had this conversation with their students. And said,
Mhm.
while I'm getting set up, let's have a recap about the discussion. And the entire class was on board about, yes, we realize that Gen AI is out there and it can do the thing that we're being tasked to do. However, and I'm putting this in one voice, but it was I don't know, over a dozen people who were contributing to this conversation.
Wow.
They're
Yeah.
saying, but we need to be expected to, critically, um,
Mm,
to be competent in this area and to
right.
be able to tell where Gen AI cannot deliver. And when we get to the job, if we can't do this on the job, we're in trouble. And
Yeah.
that was, and it wasn't the instructor that was talking down to them on this. It was they were coming up with this classroom agreement on their own, that
Wow.
they could use Gen AI for the tasks in the course, but they were deciding not to because they had a clear vision of the outcomes. They were the goals for the course and skills that they were trying to develop and their importance.
Wow. So, question, was this like an upper year class or were they first years?
This was, ooh, I forget the level. This was a college course in communications.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So probably a first or second year class then, at least if it was a
Second
college
year, I believe,
program.
actually.
Second year. Yeah.
Yeah.
And do you think that that like that's a really mature um stance for them to
I
take,
thought so.
I think. So you talk about the learning outcomes of the course. Do you think it's because the instructor had gone over those with them, or because they were an upper year, they just like had that realization that school's going to be done soon and I have to be able to do the job?
I think in this case, I mean, I have no doubt that the instructor did go over the
Yeah,
outcomes for the course with them,
right,
and make it clear why they were doing particular assessments and how it was contributing to their overall education. I have no doubt of that. But I did get the sense that they were particularly career minded.
right. So that might help too. But that's a
Mhm.
really good point. Like for anybody who's listening to this interview, that's a good point. And I think it reinforces what we hear endlessly about the importance of going over your syllabus and your course outline with your students and talking about the outcomes and why we do the thing. Um, and if I could speak in college for a second, like it's really important in college because we often teach across disciplines, and it's important to say, for this job, one, two, three, I know that I face that a lot, especially as a communications prof, because people are often like, oh, really? We got to do this thing. Like, come on, I'm never going to use an essay in real life. You're like, well, let's talk about the transferable skills and all those other good things.
But there's the other angle to that too, and that is, I mean, there's asking the students to be responsive,
Mm-hmm.
but in really trying to understand the impact that Gen AI is having
Mm-hmm.
in a particular course, whatnot, is to and how students might use it or how it might affect their learning is, I would say, as a point of advice, um, uh, reflective pedagogy is in order. Like
Oh,
step,
yeah.
just ask yourself, why am I concerned about the impact that this might have? And I mean, from the beginning, there have been, sort of, um, uh, actually, I think the way you articulated it sort of really embodies the horror story. And it is Gen AI does the thinking for you, and it does, but it doesn't. It does some thinking. I mean, if we're talking about levels of cognition, it's actually quite low,
Oh, very low.
and
Yeah.
so it can absolutely, um, it can spit out facts like a Google search, and it can
Produce
spit out
something.
it can reword something, or it can summarize to make it seem as if something has been comprehended, what have you. And to a certain extent, it can do, apply and analyze but it seems to be doing those things, but um, but I mean, primarily what it's doing is sort of like remembering and reiterating to make it seem as though comprehension has occurred. And if our expectations of students are to do those lower level tasks, then absolutely it's doing the thinking for them. But if we're asking them to think at a higher level or to produce work at a higher level where they are creating and evaluating, um, then even if they use Gen AI to produce something that has lower level elements, everything has lower level elements in it, but we only grade them on the higher level elements that humans can do, then offload that stuff. Sure. Um, uh, Using Gen AI to edit a term paper, to look over it. I mean, there's been Grammarly that's been around for a while, and before that and during that, um, groups of students getting together and
Oh, yeah.
and passing each other papers and asking to edit each other's work for just copy editing, or does this make sense, give me feedback on the structure and so
Yeah.
forth. So I mean, in some shape or form this has been happening already. The difference there, I suppose, is that when you are asking your friends or colleagues to review your work and they are evaluating it, I mean, it's a learning process for them too.
For them too. Yeah.
So maybe but if, let's say, and maybe this speaks more to inclusion, if you don't have those sorts of networks or you're not comfortable with those sorts of networks, then, asking generative AI to do some copy editing for you,
Mhm.
isn't right. But if students are being evaluated on those lower levels, then absolutely Gen AI is going to be doing the thinking for them. But if they're not being evaluated on those lower levels, then that is an example of cognitive offloading. Um, and we would hope that maybe in the process they develop those skills by observing, what Gen AI is doing and so forth. But that is a potential way around it. So I mean, as I said before, yeah, we have to adapt. Education is constantly adapting. And this is going to be one of those areas where a tool comes in and says, okay, maybe we can make this more efficient. And the efficiency in this case means perhaps students are able to hit higher levels of the cognitive realm um, than they have been before in a shorter period of time.
Mhm. Oh, that's something I would love to ask you about, but I'm actually going to backtrack a little bit to something you said earlier to get us back on our back on track for us. You mentioned if students don't feel comfortable or they don't have the networks to ask others, humans, to copy edit for them. So this actually that's a really nice bridge into my next question for you, which is how do you think, or how does AI or generative AI affect belonging?
So I'm going to pass over that inclusion element for a moment. Um, yeah, it all depends on how it's approached in the classroom, right? I stand by it. It just is. Gen AI doesn't affect anything. It's how we interact with it, right? It's just a tool. So pessimist that I am, I'll
Okay.
start off just because of the stage that we're at. I'll focus on the negative first. So
Okay.
right now, we're still somewhat in that stage of trying to assert control over generative AI use, and we're
Mm,
concerned about the
yes.
implications for academic integrity and
Yep.
so forth. And in my mind, right now at this stage, that could be doing a lot of harm for student belonging.
Ooh, why?
So there's already a concern, let's say in the classroom, that happens sometimes where there is uh, possibly a culture of distrust that even before Gen AI that even if it's just a simple statement of um, if you cheat, I'm going all the way to the top,
Yes.
and if I will if you plagiarize, I will catch you, and this and that. And what Gen AI has done is sort of like thrown even where these attitudes didn't exist before. In some cases, thrown them into hyperdrive. There's the inclination to be hyper vigilant um, to this sort of academic dishonesty. And so my concern there is that anytime we impose ourselves at the front of the classroom that way, that we are the police and we're watching, and it creates an adversarial environment which is not at all conducive to belonging. And the repercussions of this are wide ranging, I think. So in belonging studies, it's been shown that positive social interactions with faculty and staff um, more strongly foster belonging.
Mm,
Um, and when you have that intersection of academic and social integration, belonging is more strongly guaranteed than either of those on its own. And if you have an adversarial environment, then whether it's faculty or staff, those parties, those individuals or groups are no longer going to be viewed as approachable. Um, and actually, speaking of academic and social, so uh, alternately, and this is going to go back to an important belonging study. Vincent Tinto in Leaving College, he describes that academic integration occurs when students believe that their studies or the institution is contributing to their intellectual goals.
mm,
So if potentially then if students are not being taught anything that Gen AI can't do, or they're not being taught how to use Gen AI effectively for their industry, or um, if they're not um, or if they don't see the value in what they're being taught that Gen AI can do for them, um, then they're very likely not going to develop a sense of belonging at that institution, uh, which could impact their decision to remain. And it could be to remain in that program. It could be to remain in that institution. It could be to remain in higher education. Um,
It's a really significant point. Sorry to stop you, but just
no,
that's
not
a
at all.
really significant point that you've just made. That if students don't feel that they're gaining anything new or different or unique that a tool that already exists can't already do for them, then really why bother? And they're paying. So yeah, no, sorry, not to cut off your flow, but just I really want to like underline and highlight that's a really significant point.
Yeah, no. It's actually I'm glad you did because I was heading down a very pessimistic road. Uh,
Well, Tinto can be dark, so
in in a lot of ways, inside joke. Um, but no, on the other hand, there are a lot of things, there are a lot of areas where Gen AI could fit within belonging, to
yeah,
meet belonging goals, or even foster belonging. So um, one thing that's really nice about Gen AI, and I'll get back to the inclusive bit. One thing that's really nice about Gen AI is, that ability to its ability to bridge gaps in expertise. So, so this is let's say maybe a boon to lifelong learners who need a critical sort of introduction to new topics, or even just want to spitball ideas and have a back and forth, using Gen AI as an interlocutor or something like that. But to that point, um, I mean, there's potential here, uh, to have uh, generative AI, or let's say custom GPTs, to create personalized learning experiences. So, I mean, this maybe is especially handy for large classes because it's hard to connect and difficult to support high enrollment courses. That if students can get the level of personalized attention that they need, not a sort of one size fits all, but there is a resource that they can lean on, either because it can provide the necessary output, or it's been trained a certain way to to engage with individual engage with students on an individual level. I mean, especially for large classes, that would be a very powerful tool. And the more that that's able to um, the attention for, let's say, low level support or course level support, sort of in addition to let's say, fostering, let's say, equity in the course. Um, it allows the instructor and the teaching team to focus on other areas of the course and supporting students in other ways, um, and ways that normally maybe they may not have the time or energy to do, because of some of these constraints that now generative AI is able to take off their plate.
right.
Um, but I mean, if the more conversant that we can be with generative AI and how it can be used. Let's say I threw out the example earlier of in lieu of a peer network, friendship slash
Mhm.
academic network.
Yeah,
Using Gen AI as a sounding board to develop ideas, to do low level work. Um, if the more conversant that we get as instructors with generative AI, um, we can teach students how to use it uh, without sacrificing student voice. And we see a lot, we're seeing policies that are leaning towards this as well. It's sort of like use Gen AI if you want, but um, as long as it's your voice.
Yeah,
And
that's
students are
really
reminded
important.
that
Hmm.
their voice matters. Um, and I think especially for making that bridge between sort of what is the value of education, that value of studies and moving out into the world, allowing students to use it for to augment or expedite learning or to supplement studying. How can using Gen AI as a studying tool, particularly if it's framed as career readiness,
Right.
um, that that could be huge, I think. And just having instructors who are and staff and institution that's open minded, and not let's say being the police, goes a long way to saying, we're not out to get you, and we realize that this is what you need, and this is what the world is sort of
Where we're
saying
going.
it. This is
Hmm.
where we're going, and we're going to prepare you for that. It starts here.
Yeah. No, that's the big challenge, right? I know not in this recording, you and I were talking about Gen AI policies and stuff at schools, and yeah, striking that really what seems like right now, at least, that delicate balance between letting students know that they can use it, but we also don't, what you said, we don't want to lose their voice. And again, topic for a different interview, but when you said that, it made me think about identity. And feel free to respond to this. We'll try not to go on too much of another tangent, but um, you just made me think about identity research. And this relates to belonging, of course. And if we're using tools that remove the student voice, then we're also taking away their opportunity. I think we're also taking away their opportunity to develop that sense of identity as a scholar or as a fill in the blank here, whatever your vocation is. And I don't think it matters which one, because maybe you don't learn how to be that thing. And that's talked about in several studies, right? I know one that comes to mind. I think it's Kahu and All, or Kahu and Nelson, either from 2018 or 2022, when they talked about students feel more like they belong in a discipline when they feel like they belong in the classroom and they feel engaged in their studies. And just going to a class that makes them feel that makes them feel like they belong in the discipline and they made a good choice with their studies. And yeah, so this is what this is reminding me of, and identity development in higher ed, because there's a lot of changes that go on when people go on to. So anyway, feel free to respond to that if you want, but I just wanted to circle back because you made me think of that, and there's like this whole other piece to what you're saying that we're not going to get a chance to unpack today.
No, I'm afraid of leading us down another tangent, but because yes, this could end up being a very, very long, interesting. I insist, interesting,
It
but
will
very,
be
very long
interesting
conversation.
for sure.
Um, but no, I mean, just to that point, it's about seeing that seeing that they have a voice within their discipline, that
Mm-hmm.
they can make a contribution to their discipline, that that their contribution is meaningful, um, uh, and could be meaningful in career path, and building that uh, uh, cultivating that emotional investment in their studies translates to the field, translates
Absolutely.
to the career. Mm.
Yeah. So my next question for you is okay, stop making fun of my segues. I can't help it. We're going on tangents and it's taking us in so many other good directions. However, I want to ask you, um, how can instructors, and I know we've really touched on this quite a bit actually in the last like 20 minutes, but I'm going to ask you anyway in case you had specific points you wanted to make about how instructors can design courses which incorporate AI, but also at the same time foster belonging. Actually, maybe I just gave you a really good segue when we were talking about identity. So there you go.
Mm. Well, I think mm, I'll cycle back, sort of, how.
Sure.
Um, so I think first off, um, first off, there needs, you know, we each need to do an assessment of its capabilities.
Mhm.
What are my values?
Okay.
Um, why am I concerned about about Gen AI in my classroom? And seeing sort of how well it does the thing. And I suppose my you know a big piece of advice I would say is if you haven't tried it, try it. Make a Chat GPT account. Your institution might have an enterprise tool. Use it. And because it doesn't matter if you're thinking about how you can work around it or leverage it for your course. You have to get familiar with it. Right? It all starts, yeah, it starts with sort of what do we value? If it's able to do the thing, then there's what we say we value, and there's um, what we say we value, and then what we demonstrate to the students we value.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's the divide that we need to bridge. So then it comes down to the question of why does generative AI concern me as an instructor in this particular context? Um, and as you're playing with it, also, things of, like what sorts of things are you asking it to do as an instructor? Here's an opportunity to be like, um, just as my students are approaching my discipline as something that's, you know, new and wondering, like, where do you start? Um, how are you using Gen AI? Are you using it to explore something close to home or start to think about things that you don't have a basis in? And what sorts of things are you asking it to do? And what do you like about what it's able to do? And work from there and maybe in a way get the student's perspective on it. Um, but for incorporating it in course design, then there's actually let's see if I can grab up the link for you, but there's an article that was sort of put in pre-publication in the middle of December, looking at it's a scale of different levels of AI incorporation in the classroom, from completely banning it to totally embracing it,
Mm-hmm.
and everything in between. And it comes down to um, what is it able to do in the context of your discipline, and what are you comfortable with? Um, so um, I'm sorry.
Okay, I have another question
It's
for you that
there's
relates to
so
this.
it's a big question.
I know.
How do you incorporate? Of course, there's no blanket. There's no blanket answer in there, but step one is just become comfortable with it, and so that you can get an idea of maybe ways that it could be used, and become familiar with how it's being used in your industry, which tools for what purposes, because students may be expected to do these things once they in post graduation. Um, Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, that's okay. I'm making notes so that I don't forget my questions. Um, Okay, well, I kind of have two now. Sorry, I'm wiggling because one of my dogs is in my lap and he's being a smart beaver. Staying still. Anywho, um, okay, when you were talking about like try it, just get an account, create an account, or see if your institution has a license, etc. Okay, so I started a new job last fall as faculty at a college. And so, as part of that in Ontario, the new instructors have to take training for a couple of years. And as part of this training, we talked about Gen AI, of course, last fall. And I'm part of a cohort that's quite large. There's almost 50 of us. And many of them are coming out of full careers in industries, various industries. And I see this across the campuses that I work on with the other faculty that I interact with. And there's like this real fear.
Mm.
So it seems to be this great divide right now where either you're someone who's cool with it and you're like, let's see what it can do, or you're someone who's like afraid of it because you're worried maybe about what it can do. So I want to start with that point and just ask you, like, do you have any words of comfort for people who, um, like us, who've gone through work and education without it, and now all of a sudden it's here, and we have to learn how to navigate with that.
Uh, well, I suppose it's the same. It's the same advice. It's um, get comfortable with it yourself. I mean, a lot of the uh, a lot of fear is going to be going to be secondhand. Let's
Mm,
say I've heard that it does the thinking for them. I heard that it writes
okay.
their assignments,
Okay.
um, and and that's fair enough. But uh, every discipline is going to encounter different challenges. There's a reason there was a well-established, let's say, a reason behind the conventional approach that someone pre-Gen AI learned by. Um, but again, we're adaptable. So um, the advice that I would give, or the reassurance that I would give, is that uh, there's we can't be replaced. Uh, this is our vocation. We are the subject matter experts. We are professional teachers. We are professional educators. And Gen AI is going to throw some interesting scenarios at us, but we are also adaptable. And as long as we hold down onto our conception of why we're teaching, and especially not the content that we want to teach, but the skills we're trying to develop. If we hold on to our learning goals, our outcomes, and um, and we design our assessments and our lessons around those, then as long as those outcomes um, are as long as those outcomes can't be done by a machine, we're good.
Yeah, that's a whole
and
other challenge, I guess. You got to really sit down and
and
think about it, eh?
and that's a question. And I mean, so I mean, I suppose here's where the fear comes in, because I mean, you know, plenty there. My background is uh, firmly in disciplines that have as a conventional assessment, um, the essay, which has
Mhm.
been the biggest target for something
Mhm.
like Gen AI. And um, if again, like I said, you it helps to know its limitations and what it can do. What are its abilities? What are its limitations to be cognizant of that? And that's because if you find that if you find that it really does pose a danger to your assessments, and this is maybe where the fear is as well, is just thinking about I have all this work to do already.
Yeah.
How much more work is it going to be for me to reconceptualize an entire
Yes.
course and all the assessments?
Yeah.
Um, and I mean, and this is why we're as a little bit sort of still in that control phase where it's like, okay, well, we need to, like pull the power plug and we need to, we need to find a way to cut them off from so we can make
Yes.
sure that, the integrity of the assessment is maintained. But I mean, the more sustainable
Yes.
approach for the long run is you've got to be prepared to rethink what you do and how you do it.
Yeah.
And so yeah, see how the Gen AI tool performs against your course. Be mindful of your learning outcomes. If generative AI is able to do the thing extremely well, then you need to do one of two things, and that is either go back to your outcomes to see if they're high enough, or if the things that if your assessment outcomes um, reflect what you value and what you want to see from the students in their development. Or alternately, maybe the outcomes are fine, but it's how the assessment is being evaluated. The assessment task is being evaluated. Maybe that's the issue. And in that case, then maybe the easiest correction to make, no pun intended, the easiest correction to make is, let's say, to adjust the weighting so that the things you really value and that only humans can do are the things that are being graded, and the stuff that you can off that students might be offloading to Chat GPT is not going to reach the bar, and focus on developing those higher level aspects. Um, So I don't know if that's reassuring or not. You've got a lot of work ahead of you, but at least it's not a forever thing. I mean, this will become naturalized. I really look forward to, let's say, in a couple of generations of this just integrity with students in using generative AI, because just sort of it's part of an everyday toolkit that it will be used more responsibly or ingrained in students. Sort of like we don't have to be so concerned with informing students what's safe to offload and what's not. And um, but but at that point, maybe we'll even be closer to a stage of learning for the sake of learning. We'll be at a stage where grades are not, let's say, the thing that are being sought after, but the knowledge and the skills. And um, anywho, I'm about to go on another tangent. Stop me,
Yes, you
please. I
are.
think you had another question. So
Well, no, not really. You kind of touched on it, so I don't need to ask. But yeah, thank you. I also lost my train of thought because you started down this road of ungrading, which made me start to think about that.
I
Um,
stopped myself. I
I
stopped myself. I
know,
was
but
about to.
you're late. Anyway, well, unless it comes back to me, I will just ask you my final question, which is, do you have anything else that you would like to say about Gen AI or about Gen AI belonging specifically, or tips or advice for maybe instructors or just folks in general?
Um, No, I mean, I will just maybe just reiterate sort of the reassurance, and that is it looks, like the way things look right now. Um, it's because things are evolving so rapidly, because it's developing so quickly, and we're all in this together. So I mean, if you're not sure what you can do, you're not alone, and you have colleagues who are in your discipline, across disciplines, who are asking these questions and thinking around these. And this is not a conversation that we should be having in isolation.
Mhm.
Teaching and learning centers. I mean, this is a lot of energy is being devoted to Gen AI, its impact, and how we and what the next evolution of education is. So, if there isn't already a COP, you know, why? I mean, there can at least be conversation groups, or there are plenty of resources online. There are groups like AI in pedagogy, or AI in education. Sorry, pedagogy is a different group. But there are professional educators who are taking up this conversation, and offering training and insights, and uh, there's hardly a blog or podcast right now that is not, you know uh, that's that's not a jab at.
Sure. Oh, sure.
But familiarize yourself with some of the various blogs and podcasts that are on there. You can
Mhm.
find on LinkedIn,
Mhm. Absolutely true.
plenty of very knowledgeable blogs, podcasts like Tea for Teaching, stuff like
Mhm.
that. But these conversations are happening, and really what it's going to come down to is, um, within our own contexts, we need to be innovative and creative in our assessment practices. And uh, there are a lot of sources out there, resources out there, to get our creative juices flowing. And so, whether it's colleagues, whether it's a teaching and learning center, whether it's blogs and podcasts, um, yeah, this is not a conversation to have alone, and seek us all out.
Thank you. I remembered my point from earlier, and I'm still going to make it because I want to include it in this recording. Um, Talking about like creating policies, unpacking these things, what you're just saying there about resources. I just want to highlight again that our students are a resource. And I think the anecdote that you told earlier on today is a good example of that. Maybe we should be having more of these conversations with students and not just determining what what should be for them and asking how they want to use the tool or what values they see in it or don't. And yeah, so I just think you alluded to it, but you didn't add students to your list. So I just want to make sure that we add students to the list.
Thank you. Do not forget about the students,
No,
especially in a conversation about belonging.
for them. Yeah. Anyway, thank you
Brilliant.
so much. I really appreciate all of your time.
Well, thank you for having
And
me. This is
no,
great.
thank you very, very much.